Good morning, everyone. So today, Solanky and I, Prakriti, will be presenting a research presentation on child sexual abuse, reason and victim perpetrator nuances. So before we begin, I would like to put a trigger warning as this presentation does contain sensitive content regarding child sexual abuse, including descriptions of abuse and its impact on the victims. As the material may be distressing or triggering for some people, please feel free to step away from the screen for a few minutes. So, before we delve into the complexities and nuances of this topic, let us first understand what child sexual abuse entails. So, child sexual abuse refers to any form of sexual activity imposed upon a child by an older, adolescent, or an adult. This includes, but is not limited to, sexual assault, molestation, exploitation, and exposure to pornography. It's important to emphasize that child sexual abuse is not only physical, but can also be in the form of emotional manipulation, coercion, and threats. This abuse can occur within various settings, including homes, schools, communities, and even online. It violates the fundamental rights of children, undermines their trust and security, and inflicts deep and lasting harm. Many children do not tell anyone about sexual abuse by another child or another person until years after the abuse has stopped, especially when the abuse is by a sibling, a family member, or someone that their family may know. This is why it is so important that us as professionals understand the risk factors for harmful sexual behavior so that we can be aware of the signs that a child may be experiencing abuse. Studies suggest that at least one third of child sexual abuse is perpetrated by other children and young people, often against a younger child. So, let us quickly understand the different types of abuse that can be inflicted upon children. Physical abuse involves direct physical contact of a sexual nature, such as fondling, touch, or penetration. Non contact abuse imposes harm through exposure to pornography or engaging in sexual conversations with children. Emotional abuse um, incorporates manipulation and controlling of the child through threats, intimidation, or emotional coercion. Online or cyber sexual abuse exploits children through digital platforms for grooming, coercion, or exploitation. Child exploitation and trafficking includes commercially exploiting children through prostitution, pornography, or trafficking. Incest involves sexual abuse perpetrated by family members, eroding the trust and security within a family. And sexual assault by peers occurs within peer groups or community settings, such as schools, through harassment or assault. So let's move on to some reasons why children may be subjected to sexual abuse. Power and control. Perpetrators of sexual abuse often seek to exert power and control over vulnerable individuals, and children are particularly susceptible to this due to their dependence on adults for their care and protection. Psychological factors. Some perpetrators may have psychological issues, such as a history of trauma, personality disorders, or distorted beliefs about children and sexuality, which contribute to their abusive behavior. Societal and cultural norms. Societal attitudes and cultural norms that perpetuate gender inequality, normalize violence, or stigmatize discussions about sex and abuse can create an environment where abuse is more likely to occur and less likely to be reported. Family dynamics. Dysfunctional family dynamics, including substance abuse, domestic violence, parental neglect, or inadequate supervision, can increase the risk of child sexual abuse within the home or familial relationships. Access and opportunity. Perpetrators may exploit situations where they have access to children and opportunities to abuse them, such as in institutional settings like schools, childcare centers, or religious organizations. Grooming. Perpetrators often employ grooming techniques to establish trust and manipulate children into complying with the abuse. This can involve building emotional connections, providing gifts or attention, or gradually desensitizing the child to inappropriate behavior. Online platforms. The proliferation of the internet and social media has provided new avenues for perpetrators to exploit children through grooming, coercion, or exploitation in online spaces. Cultural practices and customs. In some cultures, harmful practices or traditions may normalize or even condone child sexual abuse, making it more difficult for victims to recognize disclose, or seek help. Lack of awareness and education. Insufficient awareness and education about child sexual abuse, including signs and reporting procedures, can contribute to a culture of silence and enable perpetrators to continue their abusive behavior unchecked. Structural factors. Systemic issues such as poverty, inadequate social services, and gaps in child protection systems can create environments where children are more vulnerable to abuse and less likely to receive support and intervention. Seeing these reasons, addressing child sexual abuse requires a comprehensive approach from professionals that addresses these underlying factors while promoting awareness, education, and proactive measures to protect children and support victims. Moving on, please change the slide. So let's look at some psychological nuances faced by victims of child sexual abuse. Victims of child sexual abuse are more than likely, compared to the general population, to experience depression, eating disorders, alcohol and other drugs, suicidal feelings, flashbacks, and low self esteem. Future physical sexual abuse, relationship and intimacy problems, relationship with partners who are violent to them, family and circle breakdowns for which the victim may be blamed due to divided loyalties and disbelief. They may also be forced to connect with the person who is sexually abusing them in instances where the abuser may be a friend or a family member. They may also feel pressure to retract their disclosure. There are times when a child who was sexually abused may have been coerced into believing that the abuse is normal or a game and may not appear to be distressed by the abuse. This belief can also be reinforced by parents, community members, and professionals. Thus, it is not uncommon for children to experience the distress and trauma later in life as they develop an adult awareness of their experience of sexual abuse. Moving on, I will hand it over to Solanky for the rest.
Thank you, Prakriti. Now, moving on to the perpetrator psychological nuances. So, some of the psychological nuances are: number one is psychopathic personality traits. It has been found that one of the most eminent personality traits that is studied in the assessment of child sexual offenders is psychopathy. And it is because of these traits they show characteristics such as lack of remorse, lack of empathy, irresponsibility, impulsivity, and antisocial behavior. Neuroticism, another trait that is associated with the psychological nuances of the perpetrator, is neuroticism. And it is because of this they face psychological problems such as depression, anxiety, anger, hostility, and obsessive compulsive behavior. Next is cognitive distortions. Oftentimes, it is seen that child sexual abusers justify their thoughts and actions to rationalize their sexual abuses on children. Next is observational learning. It has been seen that through observation of aggression or abusive behavior and violence from the child's immediate environment or mass media can lead to the development of maladaptive sexual behavior that may persist throughout their life course. Next is lack of empathy. As because of their psychopathic traits, they have a distorted sense of empathy, and it is because of that they also lack skills in social situations. Next is impulsivity. It is because of their psychopathic traits that they show high rates of impulsivity. Family history of abuse. It has been seen that the perpetrators often have a family history of sexual abuse. Next is internalizing behaviors. The internalizing behaviors that are being shown by the perpetrators are depression, low self esteem, and low coping mechanisms. And lastly, they also exhibit maladaptive sexual behaviors, that is, deviant sexual fantasies, and also unhealthy sexual interest in children. Moving on, yeah. Now, coming to the victim to victimizer cycle. Studies have pointed to the belief that there is a progression from victim to victimizer, as child sexual abusers often report a history of sexual victimization. However, this study did not take into account the presumed protective factors that may inhibit the development of maladaptive sexual behaviors and the gender differences in the subsequent behaviors of victim of sexual abuse. That is, they did not take into consideration that while most of the sexual abusers are males and most of the victims are females. Hence, further research was done in this, and it was inferred that the gender differences in the subsequent behavior of victims of sexual abuse was because of the fact that male survivors more often direct their reactions externally, that is, exhibiting their maladaptive sexual behaviors, whereas female survivors are more likely to internalize their feelings and express them in a self destructive behavior. Now, moving on to some research studies, as Prakriti has also pointed out, like oftentimes the child who is experiencing the sexual abuse does not feel distress at that point of time. So, Ballantyne 2012 has done a research, and it was stated that a sexually abused child might be coerced into seeing the abuse as normal or a game by their primary caregivers, siblings, or community members, and hence they may not show distress at that time. However, as adults, they become more aware of the abuse and experience distress and trauma later in life. Another study done by Tideforce et al. 2010 stated that not all perpetrators' abusive behavior stems from having a history of sexual abuse. Rather, it might be due to other abuses as well, such as bullying, emotional or physical abuse, attachment problems, or behavioral difficulties. So, their behavior has to be viewed in the context of trauma for proper assessment and treatment. Now, moving on to some treatment modalities. The first one is the trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy. It has been seen that this therapy is quite effective, and it is because of this therapy that the sexually abused children recover from their post traumatic stress symptoms and also their behavioral problems. Next is the processing therapy for sexually abused. This is a broad treatment model combining information processing, developmental, and self trauma theories, thereby addressing the role that fear processing, attachment, cognitions, and development play in the creation and maintenance of their symptoms. Next is psychopharmacological interventions. It has been seen that most children have severe or persistent symptoms that cannot be recovered from just psychotherapy, and hence medication may be warranted to reduce these difficulties and also to generate a more positive response to psychotherapy. And lastly, family therapy and group therapy. It has been found that psychoeducating the family about the sexual abuse and also introducing some protective factors in the family settings have been quite helpful in the treatment of child sexual abuse. And group therapy has been also found to be effective treatment modality for the same. Now coming to the quiz. Number one is, which of the following is considered to be a primary reason for child sexual abuse? A. Psychological factors. B. Lack of awareness or education. C. Family dynamics. Or D. All of the above. Yes, D is the correct answer. Number two is, why does a sexually abused child not feel distress during their time of an abuse? Because A, they think that it is their fault. B, they are coerced to believe that it is normal or a game. C, they are indifferent. Yes, it is B. B is the correct answer. Number three is, which of the following is considered to be psychological nuances of child sexual abuse perpetrators? A. Lack of empathy. B. Cognitive distortions. C. Maladaptive sexual behaviors. D. All of the above. Yes, D is the correct response. Lastly, which of the following is considered not to be a psychological nuance of child sexual abuse victims? A. Having stable and harmonious family relationships. B. Depression. C. Suicidal feelings. Yes, A is the correct answer. Thank you everyone for actively participating in this. Now, coming to the conclusion. So, while childhood sexual abuse is not the most prevalent form of child abuse, it is nevertheless affects a significant minority of children and adolescents and heightens the risk for acute and long-term consequences. And it is because of this that optimal treatments are required along with early identification of maladaptive behaviors, specifically those that direct target childhood sexual abuse and associated symptoms that are associated with positive long term outcomes for this vulnerable population. These are some of the references that are being used in this presentation. Thank you, everyone, for patiently listening.